Welcome you all. In the today's video, we are going to start Git, that is version control system software. So as part of first video, we'll see the introduction part, like what is version control system and why it is required and what are the benefits we'll get from version control system and so on. And after that, we'll start discussing about Git. So first, let us start what is version control system. So to understand this better, let us take a few number of scenarios. So let us say I have a developer and he has to implement some of the features in your application. So let's say feature 1 and I have feature 2 and feature 3, and there are different number of features we have, and the developer will develop all the features right in the different number of builds. Let us say he has implemented first feature and he's given demo to the client, and the client is okay with this demo, and then again he given some more requirements, and again developer is added those requirements in the second build, and again they have given demo to the client and the client said okay, and also you have given some changes or updations on the existing feature, and again developer is created one more build or one more version of the software, and finally is given demo to the client. So once the developers start creating the multiple versions, normally what he will do is whatever the code they have implemented as part of the first build, they can add some more code or they will update existing code, right? So they will add this code to the existing feature. And similarly, they will keep on adding the new changes or new code to the existing features. So they are not maintaining any copy of this build. So whatever build initially they have created is the base build. If it is okay to the client, then he is keep on upgrading the existing builds. So finally, once you give into the demo to the client, suppose client don't want have some features in the final build or final software, then he asked the first version of the build. So then what happens? We haven't maintained any versions. So we don't have any tracking of those versions. So again, if you get the previous version of the build, it is very, very difficult for us if we don't have the version control system, right? So this is the one problem which we have. So to overcome this problem, we need version control system. So I'll show you one more example. So let us say I have multiple developers. Let us say multiple developers. Let's say this is a developer 1 and developer 2 and developer 3. So multiple developers are working on multiple features. Let's say his developer is working on one feature and his another developer is working on another feature. His developer is working on some other feature. So multiple developers are working on multiple features. So at the end of the day, whatever features they are implementing, they have to merge in one single software, right? They have to merge in one single final software, we can say, final software. And when you try to merge all the code into one single final software, there will be definitely conflicts because these people are trying to, each and every individual developer is trying to merge all the code into one single unit, right? So at the time of merging all the code into one single unit, definitely there will be conflict between the code. And again, it is very difficult to fix those conflicts once the entire code is merged. And once it is merged, it is very difficult to find out which part of the code is implemented by whom. So that is very, very difficult to find. So for that, we need to maintain the different versions. And once you merge it, also we should able to get the previous versions. If there is any problem after merging, we should able to find it properly. So that is also possible by using version control system. So this is another problem. Now let me discuss one more important problem. So without using version control system, these are the problems which you have. So suppose, uh, let us say developers again. So developer 1 and developer 2 and developer 3, right? So multiple developers are working on multiple features. Let's say feature 1 and feature 2 and features 3, right? Suppose while developing these features, let's say F1, F2 and F3, they are implemented. So suppose the new developer is joined in the company, right? So they are measured the code that the whole code is available in some common place. And what the new developer will do is, suppose the new developer want to add a new code or new changes, they'll get that code from this common place and they will do some updates or some modifications, and then again send that code to the common place or common repository. So in that case, what happens is there is no tracking here. So whom is developed which feature and what are the changes they have done and when they have done those changes and what are those changes, where exactly they have done those changes. So this information is not available. So this is basically called as a tracking of all the changes. So if you are working on so many developers on one thing, so there will be definitely some conflicts. So we have to maintain the track, like whom is modified that code, in which time they have modified, what code they have modified. This information should be tracked. That's most important. So this is another problem. So to track this, to track all this information about the changes, also we need version control system. So these are the different problems which we have. To overcome these problems, we need a version control system. So now let us try to understand what is version control system. So version control system is basically a software, and by which we can do all those things. Like we can maintain the different versions of the softwares. So whatever we can, each and every piece of software, we can give a different version number, and we can do tracking. So tracking means what, and who is implemented that particular feature, who is modified that change, and where exactly they're modified, what time they have modified. So all these things we can track, and moreover, we can share the build. So we can share it. Suppose the developers are working on multiple things, like say developer 1 and developer 2 and developer 3, and they are working on develop a different number of features, right? So they want to share that code to individuals. So within the team, they want to share code between themselves, so for review or for other purpose. So how is it possible to share? We can just not manually share that code into some other developer. So we need a central system where all the code will be available, and individuals, all the developers individually should able to get the code and able to do some changes, and again save the code in the common place. So this is also required. So to do this, we need version control system. So basically, to maintain the versions and to track all the files in a project, and to share the files between multiple developers within the team. So these things we need. For that, we need version control system. So any project, we need these things. We need to mention the we need to maintain the different versions of the software, and we need to track them, and finally we should able to share the software or functionality or the features to different team members. So to overcome to get all these features, we need a version control system. And again, these version control systems, there are two kinds of version control systems we have. So one is centralized, the other one is distributed. So let me just talk about these things. So the first one is centralized version control system. Centralized version control system. So in the centralized version control system is a old process. So basically in the centralized version control system, what happens is we have multiple developers or clients. Let's say this is my PC1 and PC2 on PC3 and so on. Different PCs or different developers are working on different PCs or their own machines. And whatever the code they are implemented, that is called working copy. Okay, so working copy. So everyone is having their own working copy of the code. You can say working copy, and these working copies are there in their own local machines. Okay, so for all of them, there will be some common server, and this is also a machine. Okay, a computer machine. So all the files, whatever they have done at the end of the day, they will send all the files into this particular server through network. Okay, so network is required. So whatever done, whatever job or whatever code they have implemented individually, so their code, they will be copied into the server directly. So this is basically called commit operation. Commit means whatever files we have in the local machine, we will send those files to server. That's called commit action. Suppose some piece of code is already available in the server, I want to do some changes, then what you will do is we'll get back the code. That is called as a checkout process. And we can do updates and modification, and then we can commit it. So for every individual developer, they commit the code, whatever they have completed. And similarly, if they need to modify something, they can check out the code and again do some changes, again commit the code. So this process will be done each individual in the team. And the whole thing is depends on the central server. Okay, and this server contains the whole code, all the files, everything will be there in this server. So this is centralized repository. So here the main how this will work is basically the commits and checkouts will happen on the server side. So they will just have only working copy, the code, and to send that particular code into the directly server, they will directly send that code to the server. So through this network, and this commit and checkout operations will happen between the client and the server machines. Client in the sense again PCs, individual developers in their machines will happen. So check-in and check-out will happen between the personal computers and the server. There will be only single central server. That's the reason we can call it as a central repository. So centralized version control system. So here also the versions will be maintained, files will be tracked, everything will be there, sharing will happen. But the problem in this particular system is, suppose the developer, if you want to commit or if you want to check out, the network is required. The whole thing is depends upon one single server, right? Suppose if the network is not available, so developers cannot commit the code, cannot check out the code. And similarly, suppose this is a single point of contact we have, single point of the server. If the server is going down, so definitely the whole thing will be crash, like complete the version control system will be stopped if the service goes down. So this is the problem. And one more problem is, if the developers are more and there are number of projects increased, automatically this is very difficult to maintain everything in one single server. Even if you have multiple servers, we cannot maintain all the files in the format of files and folders. It's very, very difficult to maintain in the server side. So this is the problem. So we have a new version control systems coming to market like Git. So before that, we have something called SVN, which is an example of centralized version control system. So after that, because of these problems, we have some other concept came into market that is called distributed version control system. So now let us talk about distributed control system and how it is going to work. So Git is basically a software which is an example of distributed centralized version control system. Now let me tell you how exactly distributed version control system works. So in the distributed centralized or distributed version control system, you can simply say distributed. Let me just remove this also. All right, so now distributed version control system. Version control system. So distributed version control system. So how distributed version control system works? So in the distributed environment, so we have multiple developers. Again, there's a developer 1, developer 2, developer 3, and so on. Or we can consider them as a testers also, because testers also need version control system. Not only developers and testers in the IT field, whoever is maintaining the files, large number of files, they need version control system. So even developers, testers, everybody in the software development process require version control system. So now we'll see how distributed version control system works. So every developer in the team, they'll maintain their own working copy. So working copy means whatever the code they have implemented, that will be there in their local machine. That is called as a workspace. You can call them as a workspace. Workspace is nothing but a simple folder where all the project files will be stored. So individual people, or they will maintain the workspace in their local machines. So in the distributed version control system, so they need to maintain some repository locally. So every individual is having their own repositories in their local machines. Okay, so each individual will maintain the repositories in their local machines. So at the end of the day, whatever the code they have implemented or whatever code they want to modify or update, everything will happen within the local machine itself. So here the commit and checkout or update operations will be done within the local machine itself. So every individual is having their own local repository. Repository in the sense is a place where all the files will be maintained. So here the repository means the local repository. Here also commit and update or checkout actions will be performed on day-to-day basis. And every individual in the development team or testing teams having their own local repositories, so that they can commit and check out the files locally. So here there is no network is required, but at least once whatever the projects they have completed, whatever features they have completed in their local machines, and they committed the code in their local repositories, so they'll send this code to the one central repo. This is called distributed. This is one big repository we can say, and this is remote repository we can call remote repository, right? So here distributed mechanism works because each individual having their own local repositories, right, and they were having their own copies. So even if one copy is missing from somebody, so there will be another copies. So in the remote repository, the main copy will be maintained. So the whole project will be maintained here. And again, there are different branches like master branch and child branch or sub branch. We will create multiple branches here, different versions of the software. We will maintain different branches here. And each individual will check in the code their own branches, not in the master branch. So each individual, they check in here. We can call them as a push and pull actions. Push and pull. So here we call it as a commit and checkout actions. Commit means what? Whatever files we have in the workspace, we'll send those files to local repository. And if you want to update or modify, we'll get back those files. That's called checkout or update process. That will happen in individual machines. But once you have a remote repository, here push and pull actions will be taken care. So push means what? Each individual will push their code into the remote repository. And pull means what? Whatever the code which is already have in the remote repository, we can pull that code in the local repository and we can work on that. So push and pull actions will be performed from between repository to repository. So this is also a repository and locally this is also repository. So push and pull actions will be performed between two repositories. Whereas commit and checkout actions will be performed between workspace and repository. Between workspace and repositories. Remember that. So this is actually distributed version control system. So each individual is having their own local repositories. And once they completed their code, they will check in, they push that code into the remote repository. Okay, this is the whole process. So what is an advantage here is when you compare with the centralized version control system, in this, we individual is having local repositories. So there is no concept of like single point of failure. And the previous in the centralized version control system, we have only one server and commit and checkouts will happen only on the server side. So if the server is down, so everything is goes wrong. So here individually we'll maintain the local repositories. So we don't need a network every time, but we do this push and pull actions very rarely so that we don't need a network to work on this multiple tracking. Like we can track the files and while committing the individual files also, we will specify like what time and who is committed. All these things will be taken care by the version control tool, version control system tool. So like this here, we don't need network to commit or check out the files into your local repositories. But at the end of the project, we will push all the code into the remote repositories. So again, the remote repository, which we have like GitHub, okay, and Git bucket. So there are multiple tools are available. So individually in the local repository, we use a Git software. So Git is a good software which we have currently in the market, which is very popular, which is example for version control system. And what kind of version control system it will support? Distributed version control system it will support. It will support distributed version control system. So each individual is having Git in their own machines and they will commit and update the files in their local repositories. And finally, they'll push it. And if they need any changes, again, they pull the code in their local repositories and we can work on the working directories. So this is how distributed version control system works. So now we have understood what is version control system and what are the problems if you don't have a version control system. And also we have discussed about the benefits of version control system and two types of version control system. One is centralized version control system. We also discussed about the problem with the centralized version control system. And now this is a distributed version control system. So Git is a software, very popular software, which will support distributed version control system. Okay. So in the next video, we'll discuss more about Git software. So that's all for this video, guys. So thanks for watching.